Hi everyone. Welcome to Module 3, Gender Equality and Social Inclusion, in Nature-Based Solutions for Disaster Risk Reduction. In this session, we will explore how integrating gender equality and social inclusion into nature-based solutions can create more resilient and inclusive communities. We're excited you're here. By the end of this module, you will be able to define gender equality and social inclusion and explain its relevance to disaster risk reduction. Identify how disasters affect different groups, like women, men, and marginalized communities, in unique ways. Understand how global frameworks, like the Sendai Framework, promote inclusive DRR. And finally, use practical tools to integrate gender equality and social inclusion into nature-based solutions. Ready? Let's dive in. What exactly is GESI? GESI stands for Gender Equality and Social Inclusion. It refers to the systematic consideration of gender and social dynamics in development processes that aims to identify and address disparities affecting marginalized groups, ensuring equitable access to resources, opportunities, and decision-making. Why gender equality and social inclusion matters in disaster risk reduction. Disasters and climate impacts do not affect all people equally. Groups such as women, girls, persons with disabilities, ethnic minorities, indigenous peoples, the elderly, and those living in poverty are often more exposed and vulnerable. This is largely due to pre-existing inequalities, like limited access to education, resources, legal rights, and decision-making power, which are often intensified during crises. Take the Hindu Kush Himalayas, for example. Women there already take on the bulk of household and agricultural duties. Climate change has only added to their burden, bringing water shortages and crop failures that make daily life even harder. That's why disaster risk reduction needs to be inclusive. It's not just about technical solutions, it's about understanding how different people experience risk, breaking down the barriers they face, and ensuring they're part of the planning and decision-making. By mainstreaming gender equality and social inclusion, known as GESI, into DRR efforts, we can design strategies that are not only more just, but also more effective. Because when we involve everyone, we build resilience that truly lasts. Recognize how disasters affect groups differently. Women and men often experience hazards differently, and this is shaped by social norms, roles, and expectations. For example, in some contexts, rigid gender roles can limit women's access to early warning systems or technical training, making them more vulnerable during disasters like floods or storms. Other factors, such as disability, age, ethnicity, or caste, can also restrict access to critical support like emergency aid, safe shelters, or post-disaster recovery jobs. These are what we refer to as differentiated vulnerabilities, where specific groups face unique risks and challenges based on their social identity or status. But inclusive disaster risk reduction can change that. When women and marginalized groups are meaningfully involved in planning and implementation, the outcomes are not only more equitable, they're also more effective. Their participation leads to stronger risk assessments, enhanced local knowledge, and more targeted solutions. As GFDRR points out, empowering citizens and communities, particularly those most excluded, contributes to more resilient and sustainable outcomes. Key takeaway? Inclusive decision-making is a core principle of effective disaster risk reduction. When nature-based solutions are designed using a GESI lens, that is, with attention to gender equality and social inclusion, they can better address the needs of diverse groups. This ensures that adaptation measures like ecosystem restoration or green infrastructure genuinely strengthen resilience, without reinforcing existing inequalities. Understand international commitments on inclusive DRR and NbS. Let's now take a closer look at how global frameworks promote gender equality and inclusion in disaster risk reduction and nature-based solutions. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the world's leading agreement on DRR, explicitly emphasizes the need for inclusive approaches that leave no one behind. This means ensuring that women, persons with disabilities, indigenous communities, and other marginalized groups are not only protected, but also actively involved in shaping disaster and climate resilience strategies. To support this, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, has identified key trends in gender-responsive DRR, organized under the 4 priorities of the Sendai Framework. Priority 1: Understanding disaster risk. Women-led civil society organizations and technical agencies are developing initiatives that boost women's awareness of disaster risks, especially at the community level. This not only strengthens resilience and capacity but empowers women and local communities to make informed decisions about risk reduction. Priority 2: Strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Although GESI is not deeply embedded in all governance guidance under the Sendai Framework, there's progress, especially in the Pacific region. Several initiatives there have integrated GESI into DRR governance, giving women a seat at decision-making tables from the community to the national level. This inclusion is helping shape more responsive and equitable DRR policies and actions. Priority 3: Investing in DRR for resilience. Since 2015, we've seen a steady rise in investments that combine DRR with GESI goals. Programs like the Shifting the Power Coalition and the Women Delegates Fund demonstrate how targeted funding and infrastructure projects can empower women and build community resilience. However, there's still a strong call for more financial resources to scale up these gender-equitable approaches. Priority 4: Enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. In many countries, women are taking on leadership roles in disaster preparedness and recovery. They're acting as knowledge brokers, community communicators, and leaders in resilience initiatives, particularly in civil society-led efforts. This is especially powerful when it includes diverse women, young women, women with disabilities, and those from marginalized backgrounds. When these voices are included, disaster response becomes not only faster, but fairer and more effective. Summary point: International frameworks like the Sendai Framework are setting the stage for GESI responsive DRR. By aligning local and national actions with these global commitments, we can ensure that nature-based solutions are both effective and equitable, creating resilience for all, not just a few. Pathways promoting GESI for community resilience. Now that we've seen how global frameworks like the Sendai Framework are recognizing the importance of inclusion, let's take a closer look at how these ideas are actually being put into action on the ground, in communities. There are several key pathways through which gender equality and social inclusion are being promoted to build stronger, more resilient communities. Pathway 1: Women-led partnerships and coalitions. Women-led groups are powerful agents of change. Take the Shifting the Power Coalition, for example. It brings together women from diverse backgrounds to advocate for climate and disaster resilience. By working together, these partnerships strengthen women's voices and influence at local, national, and even regional levels, shaping inclusive DRR strategies. Pathway 2: Women's economic empowerment for DRR. When women have the means to earn and invest, they also gain the power to prepare and recover from disasters. Programs like the Vanuatu Skills Partnership help women generate income through handicrafts, for instance, and invest in essentials like solar lighting, school fees, or safer housing. This not only strengthens individual resilience, but uplifts the entire community. Pathway 3: Diverse and long-term partnerships. Sustained collaboration is another key pathway. When women leaders, disaster management offices, and regional actors, like the Pacific community, work together. It ensures disaster risk reduction strategies are gender responsive, inclusive, and trusted by the communities they serve. Pathway 4: Influencing policy and infrastructure. And finally, women's participation can directly shape better systems. From training women for leadership roles, to influencing gender-inclusive policy, to improving infrastructure like local markets, these efforts empower women while reducing disaster risks. Countries like Fiji and Vanuatu offer great examples of this kind of transformation. In short, when we open up these pathways, supporting women's leadership, economic opportunities, and meaningful participation, we lay the foundation for safer, more inclusive, and more resilient communities. GESI frameworks and tools for nature-based DRR. Building on the idea that long-term inclusion and empowerment are essential, we now explore how to practically apply GESI in nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction. To make GESI a meaningful part of NbS projects, several frameworks and toolkits have been developed by global organizations. These resources provide step-by-step guidance, practical checklists, and measurable indicators to ensure GESI is integrated at every phase of a project, from planning and design to implementation and monitoring. One key example is the Nature for Climate Adaptation Initiative (NCAI) technical report by IISD. It offers detailed strategies to integrate gender equality and social inclusion while enhancing ecosystem resilience and community well-being. Across these tools, a set of core principles consistently stands out as essential for inclusive and effective NbS. Conduct gender and social analysis to understand roles, needs, and vulnerabilities. Engage diverse stakeholders through participatory and culturally sensitive approaches. Ensure equitable governance and benefit sharing, so all groups have fair access and influence. Build capacities of women, youth, indigenous peoples, and marginalized communities. Safeguard rights and prevent harm, including addressing gender-based violence and exploitation. Monitor progress using gender and social indicators to track whether inclusion goals are being met. These principles will be unpacked in more detail in the following slides, showing how each one contributes to building more just, inclusive, and resilient communities. Now that we've introduced the value of GESI toolkits, let's take a closer look at the key elements that most of these toolkits emphasize. These components are essential for making nature-based solutions, NbS, more inclusive and equitable across all stages of a project. 1. Gender and social inclusion analysis. Effective frameworks begin with a clear understanding of the roles, needs, and capacities of different social groups. Toolkits often guide practitioners to assess who performs key tasks, for example, who collects water or manages forests, and how responsibilities, benefits, and burdens vary by gender, caste, ethnicity, or disability. Mapping local power dynamics and social norms is an essential foundation for designing GESI responsive projects. 2. Inclusive stakeholder engagement. Participation must be meaningful and inclusive. Toolkits emphasize approaches that allow all groups to express their views freely, often through separate focus group discussions for women, youth, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. For instance, a climate planning toolkit in Tanzania tailored its engagement by creating dedicated modules for women's cooperatives and rural communities, ensuring that traditionally excluded voices helped shape the solutions. 3. Equitable governance and benefit sharing. GESI responsive frameworks emphasize inclusive governance structures, such as co-management committees that actively involve women and marginalized groups in decision-making roles. These frameworks also consider how the benefits of a project, like employment, income opportunities, and ecosystem services, are fairly distributed. A strong example comes from the Coastal Afforestation Initiative in Bangladesh, where women were intentionally included in local committees, and 42% of the project's beneficiaries were women, ensuring more equitable outcomes for the community. 4. Capacity building and awareness. To support meaningful participation, many toolkits emphasize building technical skills and leadership among underrepresented groups. Training programs, for example, supporting women as nursery managers or empowering persons with disabilities in leadership roles, help create more inclusive and resilient communities by ensuring everyone can contribute on equal footing. Let's go a step further. Beyond inclusive planning and benefit sharing, it's also crucial to protect the rights and safety of vulnerable groups, and that's where safeguarding policies come in. Many UN and NGO toolkits strongly emphasize the need for these policies, especially in community-based projects. Why? Because they help prevent exploitation, abuse, and gender-based violence, also known as GBV, which can often be overlooked if not addressed from the start. So, what do these policies actually look like? Take a look at Box 1. It highlights key examples like the IUCN's Global Standard for NbS, CBD's MOOTZ Cuxtal Guidelines, and the Wildlife Conservation Society's Safeguarding Policy. These provide practical starting points to make sure your NbS projects are not just inclusive, but also safe, ethical, and grounded in human rights principles. Safeguarding isn't just a checkbox, it's a commitment to doing no harm, and it builds trust with the communities we work with. Let's now turn to one of the most important aspects of GESI integration, measuring progress. To ensure that inclusive goals are not just stated but achieved, GESI frameworks emphasize the use of gender and social indicators. These indicators help monitor whether a project is truly reaching and benefiting diverse groups. For instance, projects might track the number of women and men engaged in planting or restoration activities, assess the participation of youth and indigenous peoples, or analyze changes in income levels disaggregated by gender. These kinds of data points are not just technical, they're essential for accountability and learning. They allow practitioners to evaluate impact, identify gaps, and make adjustments when needed, ensuring the project continues to reflect the principles of equity and inclusion throughout its life cycle. As we've seen, toolkits and principles provide the how of integrating GESI into NbS. But who is creating these tools? Let's look at some of the key organizations leading the way. Several international agencies have developed guidance, training, and policies that support inclusive and gender-responsive disaster risk reduction, particularly when using nature-based solutions. UNDRR, through its Words into Action series, shares toolkits that highlight the importance of community participation and equitable approaches to risk reduction. IUCN provides specific guidance on ecosystem-based DRR, encouraging gender mainstreaming and inclusive decision-making in restoration efforts. GFDRR and UNEP, among others, offer e-learning courses and tools that help integrate GESI perspectives into practice, including training on NbS implementation. UN Women, IFRC, and other UN agencies contribute practical checklists to ensure women's leadership is recognized, for example, in emergency committees and local DRR planning. Even national and local governments are stepping up. In South Asia, several countries have begun embedding GESI principles into their DRR policies and plans. So, what's the takeaway? A wealth of frameworks and resources are available to help integrate GESI into NbS. They focus on key principles like participation, disaggregated data, equitable governance, and capacity building. And when these are applied thoughtfully, like in the community-driven mangrove restoration project in Bangladesh, which deliberately included women as 42% of beneficiaries, the outcomes are not just ecologically sound, but socially empowering as well. Integrating GESI in nature-based solutions, NbS, planning and design. Now that we've talked about why GESI matters in NbS, Let's move on to how it can actually be applied on the ground, step by step. Integrating GESI isn't just a one-time activity. It needs to be thoughtfully included at each stage of the NbS project cycle, from early planning through to implementation and monitoring. So let's walk through 4 key steps that help make that happen. Step A: Context and stakeholder analysis. We begin by asking, who lives in this landscape, and how are they affected by current conditions? Identify the full range of stakeholders. This means going beyond general categories and naming real groups: women, men, elderly people, youth, indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, the landless, persons with disabilities. Think about their roles in managing natural resources. Who collects firewood? Who makes decisions about land use? Assess social power dynamics. Who holds authority in the home or village? Are certain groups excluded because of caste, religion, gender, or age? For instance, in rural Nepal, women often manage farms because men have migrated for work, but they still might not own the land. Engage people in an inclusive way. This means making sure meetings are held at times and places that are accessible to everyone. In Zanzibar, separate workshops were held for women and local cooperatives using the Pamoja Voices Toolkit, so that their opinions could shape the plan directly. Understand land rights and governance. If a project is restoring land or water, make sure those using it, especially marginalized groups, have legal recognition. In Bangladesh, women were formally included in local co-management committees. Gather disaggregated baseline data. That means collecting data separated by gender, age, ability, and other factors, like who earns income, who accesses clean water, who faces the most risk during disasters. This baseline gives you a foundation to measure progress later. Key point: this step gives you a big picture understanding of who's involved, who holds power, and where the gaps in inclusion exist. Step B: Inclusive risk and vulnerability assessment. Now that you know who's in the community, you ask, how does each group experience risk and climate impacts? Map hazards. Identify the climate risks in the area, like floods, droughts, or erosion, and look at who's most exposed. Is it low-income families in floodplains? Is it small fishing communities losing their shoreline? Explore social vulnerability. Ask how different groups may face these risks. Do women have limited access to early warning systems? Do people with disabilities have difficulty evacuating during floods? Recognize capacities, not just risks. Women may have traditional knowledge about plants or water sources. Youth might know how to use mobile apps or digital tools. These strengths can enhance resilience. Look at barriers. Lack of land rights, unsafe shelters, or inaccessible evacuation routes are all social factors that increase risk for specific groups. Use an intersectional lens. Vulnerability isn't one size fits all. A young, low-income girl with a disability might face different risks than an elderly male farmer. Good assessments pay attention to those intersections. Key point: this step helps ensure that solutions aren't just technically sound, they're socially relevant and serve real community needs. Step C: Identifying and appraising NbS options. Here, you co-create the actual nature-based solutions, with the community, not just for them. Brainstorm ideas together. Whether it's mangrove planting, reforestation, or creating wetlands, everyone should help generate the options. That includes farmers, fisherfolk, women's groups, and youth. Evaluate benefits for all groups. For example, planting fruit trees might help improve women's nutrition and income, while planting only timber might benefit landowners later, who are often men. In Bangladesh, they created a forest, fish, fruit model that supported food security and women's livelihoods. Design for accessibility. If some participants are elderly or disabled, make sure tools, tasks, and workspaces are suitable for them. NbS projects should include shaded areas, ramps, and safe paths. Use inclusive decision-making tools. When prioritizing project options, include gender and inclusion as core criteria, not just cost or ease of implementation. Key point: the best solutions are not only environmentally sound, but equitable and inclusive, designed with everyone's needs in mind. Step D: inclusive implementation and management. Finally, we make sure that the project is not only inclusive on paper, but also in practice. Form diverse management groups. Committees should have women, youth, minorities, and persons with disabilities, not just attending, but leading and making decisions. Hire equitably. Provide jobs for marginalized groups and structure work hours or wages to suit their needs. In Gujarat, coastal restoration work provided valuable income for local villagers. Offer training and capacity building. Teach technical and leadership skills. In Zimbabwe, women received leadership training alongside tree planting efforts so they could lead in the long run. Ensure accessibility and safety. Provide gear for sun/rain, childcare, transport, or safe spaces for meetings so everyone can participate fully. Respect local customs while pushing for inclusion. For example, instead of appointing one leader, use a co-chair system, male and female, to show inclusive leadership in action. Track participation. Keep records of who's involved and gather feedback regularly to make sure underrepresented voices are heard and respected. Key point: implementation is inclusive when the community is not just labor, but leadership. When women, youth, and others co-own the process, they help make the solution more sustainable and effective. Let's wrap it up with the final step: monitoring, evaluation, and learning, MEL. This is where we check: is our project really delivering the benefits we intended? Is it inclusive? And most importantly, how can we improve? First, set gender-sensitive indicators. These help us track social impact in real terms. For example, we might measure the percentage of women in leadership positions, changes in income for vulnerable households, or the satisfaction levels of persons with disabilities. These aren't just numbers, they tell us whether the project is truly benefiting everyone. Next, collect disaggregated data. That means breaking data down by gender, age, ethnicity, disability, and more. Let's say we conduct a survey. If we don't know who responded, we can't tell whether any groups are missing out. Maybe women are attending activities but not benefiting economically. Disaggregated data helps us spot those gaps. Then, make monitoring inclusive. Instead of just bringing in external evaluators, involve the community. Women's groups could help track tree growth. Youth could use mobile apps to monitor biodiversity. In Canada, for example, the Kaska Land Guardians program brought elders and youth together to combine traditional and scientific knowledge. That's inclusive monitoring in action. Also, build in feedback loops. MEL should be a two-way process. Communities need safe, accessible ways to give input, especially those who are often overlooked. That might be regular review meetings, suggestion boxes, or targeted focus groups. A project in Zanzibar showed how community-led MEL helped keep things accountable and responsive. Finally, apply what you learned through adaptive management. Let's say your data shows women aren't benefiting from the NbS as much as expected. Maybe they can't access certain areas, or their labor isn't compensated. Instead of sticking to the plan, revise it. Maybe designate plots for women or provide transport. What matters is flexibility and co-designing improvements with affected groups. Key takeaway: MEL isn't just about reporting results, it's about learning, adapting, and staying true to our inclusion goals. When done well, it ensures that NbS not only protect ecosystems but also uplift all parts of the community. Let's take a look at how GESI principles have been successfully applied in NbS projects across different countries and contexts. Each of these examples shows that when gender and social inclusion are prioritized, both social and ecological outcomes improve. Our first example comes from the community-based adaptation to climate change through coastal afforestation project in Bangladesh. This project planted over 9,600 hectares of mangroves to protect coastlines from cyclones and saline intrusion. But importantly, it didn't stop at the environment, it deliberately integrated GESI principles into every step. Local communities managed nurseries and plantation sites. It aimed for balanced gender participation and achieved it. 42% of the beneficiaries were women. Women took active roles on local co-management committees. These women helped decide how resources like fruit trees and fish ponds were distributed, leading to an average increase of $1,000 in household income per year. This shows that GESI-responsive NbS can protect nature and empower people, especially women, both economically and in governance. Case Study 2: Cooperative Planning in Zanzibar, Tanzania. In Zanzibar, Tanzania, a toolkit called Pamoja Voices was used to help local cooperatives build more inclusive and climate-resilient plans. This toolkit guided facilitators through a step-by-step participatory process to ensure women, youth, and marginalized groups were meaningfully involved. Separate focus groups were held so that everyone, especially those who are often unheard, could speak freely. Women's needs were directly reflected in the solutions, for example, the support for women-led salt harvesting microenterprises during the dry season. Governance structures were reshaped to include shared decision-making across all groups. The result was a planning process and outcome that was more inclusive, more just, and better aligned with real community needs. Case Study 3: Indigenous-led adaptation in Canada. In Canada's Cosca-Dina territory, the Cosca Land Guardians program demonstrates how Indigenous knowledge and inclusive governance can strengthen resilience. Elders share traditional ecological knowledge. Women lead on land use decisions. Youth are employed to help monitor wildlife and watersheds. The program blends Western science with cultural traditions, making it a powerful example of community-driven NbS. This case reinforces the idea that diverse perspectives and lived experiences are not just complementary, but essential for effective adaptation. Case Study 4: Mainstreaming GESI in Rwanda's flood resilience. In Rwanda, GESI principles have been built directly into national flood resilience initiatives. Through the National Adaptation Plan supported by the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI, the approach includes detailed assessments of gendered vulnerabilities, capacity building targeting women and marginalized groups, strong community engagement to shape more inclusive solutions. By putting GESI at the core of flood planning, these efforts ensure that resilience strategies address the real needs of people in high-risk areas, not just technical challenges. Case Study 5: Citizen Science in Informal Settlements, Indonesia and Fiji. Lastly, the Revitalizing Informal Settlements and Their Environments, RISE, program shows how community-led data collection can improve disaster risk reduction in urban areas. Residents, mostly women, used smartphones to photograph flood levels in their neighborhoods. They also used messaging apps to discuss flood risks, share updates, and build awareness. In total, over 5,300 data points were collected across 13 settlements. This two-way communication empowered communities with evidence for advocacy, improved local flood response, and demonstrated how digital tools can elevate marginalized voices, even in informal urban settings. Together, these case studies show that GESI is not just a box to check, it's a transformational approach. When inclusion is woven into nature-based solutions, we create not just greener systems, but stronger, fairer, and more resilient communities. Challenges and opportunities in integrating GESI into NbS for DRR. As we've seen, integrating gender equality and social inclusion, GESI, into nature-based solutions, NbS, can significantly strengthen disaster risk reduction. But it's important to also acknowledge the real-world challenges that can make this work difficult, as well as the opportunities we can harness to push forward. Let's begin with the challenges. Cultural barriers. In many communities, traditional norms and power structures can limit the participation of women, youth, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. These barriers may discourage open dialogue or prevent certain groups from taking on leadership roles in NbS projects. Resource constraints. GESI-responsive projects often require additional time, training, and funding. Where technical capacity or financial support is limited, inclusion efforts can fall short, not out of unwillingness, but because the tools or staff just aren't in place. Data limitations. To design inclusive solutions, we need to understand how different groups are affected, but in many cases, gender and socially disaggregated data is missing. This makes it harder to identify vulnerabilities or track who's truly benefiting from a project. There are also growing opportunities. Policy momentum. Globally and nationally, we're seeing stronger policy commitments to inclusion. Frameworks like the Sendai Framework and national GESI policies give us a mandate and direction to mainstream gender and inclusion in DRR and NbS efforts. Technological advances. Digital tools, like mobile surveys, participatory mapping, and citizen science platforms, are making it easier to gather inclusive data and engage marginalized communities in planning and monitoring. Global frameworks and commitments. International agreements are not just symbolic, they support funding, knowledge sharing, and accountability mechanisms that can help scale up GESI integration in real projects. As we come to the end of this module, let's step back and reflect on what truly makes a nature-based solution, NbS, inclusive, equitable, and effective for disaster risk reduction. Integrating gender equality and social inclusion, or GESI, isn't an optional add-on. It's a core principle that must be embedded at every stage of a project, from initial planning and risk assessment, to implementation, monitoring, and learning. What does this look like in practice? It means starting with a clear understanding of who is vulnerable and why. It means engaging those groups in decision-making processes, not just as participants, but as leaders and co-creators of solutions. It means making sure that the benefits, whether it's jobs, training, income, or safety, are shared fairly. We've seen this in action through the Bangladesh mangrove afforestation project, where 42% of the beneficiaries were women, and where women actively participated in managing nurseries and co-governing restoration efforts. That project achieved both social and ecological goals, because it was designed with inclusion in mind. So what are the key actions to take forward? Conduct gender-sensitive risk and vulnerability assessments to understand real needs. Design interventions that meet the priorities of marginalized groups, like planting food security trees or ensuring infrastructure is accessible to all. Train and hire underrepresented groups throughout the project cycle, not just in labor roles, but also in leadership and decision-making. Use disaggregated data in monitoring, evaluation, and learning (MEL), so we can track impact and adjust when needed. When we center GESI and NbS, we're not just doing the right thing, we're building stronger, smarter, and more resilient communities. Because when everyone's knowledge, voices, and capacities are included, disaster risk reduction efforts become more just and more successful. Now that we've covered the key concepts and real-world examples of GESI-responsive nature-based solutions, it's time to apply what we've learned in a practical and reflective way. Let's imagine you're leading the design of a mangrove restoration project for a coastal community, an NbS with the potential to build both ecological resilience and social equity. But remember, success depends on inclusion from the very beginning. To help you think this through, here's your task. Imagine you are designing a mangrove restoration NbS for a coastal community. Draft a checklist of 5 GESI considerations you would implement. E.g., include at least one woman on the management committee, provide nursery training to local youth and women, etc. Then discuss how you would monitor whether each consideration was met during the project. As you complete this reflection, think back to the tools, case studies, and principles we discussed. Stakeholder engagement, equitable governance, gender-sensitive indicators, capacity building, safeguarding policies. This exercise is not just theoretical, it mirrors real steps that practitioners take to make sure NbS are inclusive, fair, and grounded in community realities. Let's use this opportunity to explore how GESI can be intentionally embedded in project planning, ensuring that restoration not only revives ecosystems, but also empowers people. We've now reached the end of this session on integrating gender equality and social inclusion into nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction. As this is a self-paced module, you're encouraged to revisit any sections that sparked your interest or that you'd like to explore further. Thank you once again for your attention and participation. We hope this session supports your journey toward more inclusive and resilient action. Take care, and goodbye for now.